Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming back for another episode of The Other Human in the Room. I may have to clear my throat a few times in this episode. I'm hoping it's not too much. I'm just recovering from a cold and I've got the little froggy in my throat. So if I have to take breaks or drink water or clear my throat, I thank you in advance for your patience. Okay, so today's topic for the podcast is a very relevant one. So the topic is why we procrastinate. And why it's relevant for me today is I'm literally recording this podcast at a different time than I had set out to do it. And one thing that my brain wanted to offer me today was sort of a shame spiral about the irony that I've procrastinating doing my episode about procrastination. But then I stopped my shame spiral because I remembered the content of this episode, which, as you can probably guess, is that shame spirals about anything we do are not useful. And it's actually more human to reframe anything, including procrastination, as something that makes sense to us as a human being with a human brain. So, what a great lead in, right? So, here I am, much later in the day than I typically record podcasts because things came up that I decided to prioritize instead because my body and brain were feeling more tired and were letting me know that they wanted to switch up the task so that I was doing this in a frame of mind that felt good for me. And that's what I did. So one way I could name that is procrastination, but I also could name it some other things, which I'm going to talk about in the episode. So just as a beginning, just so you know what's going to happen in this episode, first, I want to talk about why we procrastinate, sort of talk about the more theoretical ideas of procrastination, where we get this concept from, if it is or isn't that useful to call it procrastination, which you probably have a guess what I think, as well as some practical approaches to help when you find yourself stuck in, I'm putting in air quotes, procrastination. So there's practical strategies at the end as well. This isn't only saying, listen, you don't have to be sad if you procrastinate, though that is what the first portion of the podcast is. I also am at the end going to give you strategies for if you find yourself in that kind of delaying something you wanted to do loop, some really practical ways that I have learned to use that allow me to do things I want to do. So you'll get that as well. All right. So as a start, as I sometimes do, I wanted to look up what's the definition of the word procrastination? Where does this word come from? That sort of thing. So one definition is the act of postponing, delaying, or putting off, especially habitually or intentionally. A quote that I don't know who said it, but someone said procrastination is the thief of time, which I think is part of what gets us into a bit of a panic shame spiral about things. It comes from some Latin words and that together mean of tomorrow. So I guess the notion is we're pushing things to tomorrow that we could be doing today, right? And this other definition has some of the other elements that I think are important. So moving or acting slowly so as to fall behind and implying blameworthy delay, especially through laziness or apathy. And I'd say all those extra words that were in that definition, especially the word lazy, I feel like that's very connected with the word procrastination for most people. And it kind of reveals how shamey even the word procrastinate can mean. As we just learned from the Latin definition, you could literally just mean yeah, I procrastinated today. I procrastinated washing the dishes because instead of washing them tonight, I washed them tomorrow. The grammar of that sentence did not make sense unless you are a time traveler, but you know what I'm saying. So it's I meant to do this task on Monday. I ended up doing it Tuesday. I procrastinated. I did something instead of one day the next day. But underneath, there's all this blamey, shamey connective tissue attached to the phrase procrastination. And, I'm not about shame here. I'm about the opposite of shame, And so I think that there's some really inhuman shame-based stories that are attached to that word. So I'm going to probably use the word procrastination at some points in this episode, but I'm also going to play around with calling it delaying, rescheduling, reconsidering, right? And seeing if that feels better to me and in my life, if that feels better. So I invite you to do the same, because say the habit of procrastination or of delaying something you intended to do at one point to another point in time, like say that is something you want to change in your life, definitely putting it in a context where it feels like a shame blame thing, where it's a bad habit with a capital B-H, like biting your nails. As I've said in previous podcasts, shame as a motivator for change sucks. It's terrible. I don't recommend it because it doesn't get you very far. So if you find that even just the word procrastination makes your heart sink like a stone and you feel all the shame, try calling it delaying, rescheduling, reconsidering, seeing if that helps instead. Okay. And then the other thing is, I find it fascinating. I'm working with all these clients who work in healthcare, and they talk about things they're procrastinating. And some of them are what you would consider classical, like, I really meant to finish that patient form on Monday, but I still haven't done it yet. And it's Friday, so that's like kind of more a classical procrastination thing. But in a sense, right? But sometimes it's actually like not procrastination. It's actually something else, but we're like labeling it procrastination as a way to blame ourselves for something that's like not ours to blame. So one thing I see is like having such a giant number of to-dos on your list and expecting yourself to get them done in a very short period of time. And then you're blaming yourself that you're procrastinating getting it done. So like say that same example. So it's like, I meant to get that patient form done on Monday, but it's Friday and I still haven't done. And it's like, tell me about your Monday. It's like, well, I had a full day of patient care, including I worked right through my lunch hour. And then I had to drive my kid to soccer practice. And then I was just so exhausted at 11 p.m. that what's wrong with me? Why did I procrastinate doing that patient form? Well, maybe it just wasn't actually that realistic to think you would get the patient form done if you look at the rest of the things. Like sometimes it's about our expectations for ourselves being so high. And then we beat ourselves up if we don't get literally an impossible amount of tasks done in the same day. And we call that procrastination and beat ourselves up for that. See how it's like a total lose-lose situation? So just fact check what you call procrastinating. And if instead it's really kind of sort of shooting yourself in the foot to begin with, I feel like there's a better metaphor than setting yourself up to fail, you could say, like maybe that what's really happening is the expectations of what you thought you could do in a day don't match the bounds of time. And so then that's not procrastinating. It's actually an issue of time blindness or overestimating what you can do in a day, which is another skill that you could practice. And actually, it's one of the main skills I talk about with clients is like getting a better sense of how long things take and scheduling them and pacing them appropriately so that you get them done. That's not procrastination, though. That's actually kind of a planning, scheduling skill, right? Another reason someone could procrastinate is because they actually don't want to do it. And so it's not like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I get the motivation to do the thing? It's nothing's wrong with you. And actually, your brain and body are very wise. And so they keep distracting you with other things instead of doing this thing because you actually don't want to do it. You are delaying it to never because you never want to do it. And maybe that's fine. So there's like some things. An example, sometimes I like overpromise stuff to patients. A patient recently was like, oh, I'm looking for a certain kind of therapist. And I know a lot about therapy now and different mental health modalities. And I was like, oh, let me see if I can find you someone in the area. And like, maybe I can find you someone. And the patient's like, okay, but they have to have this and this criteria. And then, so like, I basically promised the patient that I would, I guess, do a Google search. I didn't have any other ideas. It was like, I was going to try and find them a therapist, even though that's like, doesn't have to be my job. And I'm not that skilled at doing this job. I don't know all the therapists in town. It was going to be a whole bunch of work. And so then I kept procrastinating. Like it was an inbox item and I just kept forwarding it and forwarding it. And then I just had to get real with myself. Like, Joan, you don't want to do this. Like, I think I did do a Google search and then I realized I don't know what I'm even really looking for. This isn't a fit for me, And so I just had to get real with myself saying, the reason I'm procrastinating is because I don't want to do this. This isn't the best use of my time. And really I just overpromised. And so now my body's letting me know I overpromised in the moment. Actually, it's kind of the same as what I just said as the first reason why not. Like you overpromise to yourself by overloading your schedule, or you could overpromise to other people and your body's just letting you know it's not going to happen. It's not for you to do. So those are, I guess, kinds of procrastination, but like you don't have to overcome procrastinate and force yourself to do any of that. You can just honor the fact that your body's letting you know, your brain's letting you know, not for me, and then do something about that instead, right? So then the third category that people call procrastination is what I'm going to kind of focus on as like real procrastination, which is, no, I really want to do this thing. This thing's actually really important to me. And I keep delaying when I started, or I'll like half-heartedly do it and then I don't finish it. It's something I really want to do. And I just keep avoiding it. I'm not sure why. And so that kind of procrastination. The strategies I talk about later in the episode are really about those, because it's sort of overcoming what's coming up that's stopping you from doing something you actually want to do. Yeah, because even then, I don't have to label that procrastination if it brings up shame. I definitely don't have to call myself lazy or failure or any of that stuff. Because really, even in those cases, so say for the example, I really wanted to record this podcast today. I love recording this podcast. I love sharing it with everybody. And it didn't happen when it was supposed to. So I could have gone in this whole spiral of what's wrong with me. I really wanted to do this thing and I didn't do it. I'm such a procrastinator. Like I tell my whole story using that frame. But I'm instead working from the framework that everything I do makes sense. Everything I do, everything my body and brain offer and suggest that I do through my emotions is trying to take care of me, is trying to work on behalf of me. So I certainly never have to beat myself up for that. I can instead show myself compassion and understanding I'm a human who definitely is not a robot and therefore never is going to do things exactly on the right planned time to the millisecond. No. But I also can get curious about what's behind this version of procrastination. So today, if I didn't have the awareness I now have, and I was, I had done a bunch of tasks, I took a break to eat lunch, and then I was doing some other household stuff. I used to be like, oh, look at me procrastinating from getting that podcast, and something must be wrong with me. But now I'm getting curious because I know what that kind of like procrastination really means. And so this is the framework I want to offer you that actually applies to all the examples I just listed. Procrastination is protection. When your brain sends a signal to your body inviting you to not do something you were planning to do, which we're calling procrastination in this episode, that is because your brain is trying to protect you from something. And what is your brain always trying to protect you against? It's trying to protect you against getting harmed. And the signal that your body has for getting harmed is pain. When you notice you are avoiding, delaying, procrastinating, doing something that you set out to do, the double check if the reason isn't 100% of the time, you are trying to avoid painful sensations, painful emotions, right? There's emotions in your body that your brain is predicting will happen when you do this task. Therefore, you're avoiding doing the task. It makes perfect sense. It's not silly. It's not a matter of not being disciplined or self-controlled enough. Your brain makes total sense and it's trying to protect you. So why don't I do my patient forms? Because I have a cornucopia of bad feelings when I do them. I have a lot of baggage around forms. I have baggage around what they mean to me. This came up with a client recently, actually comes up with most clients. Most of us have like a lot of emotional drama about patient forms, Why didn't I book that massage appointment? I know that really helps me because I didn't want to feel the bad emotion of guilt for letting people down and the shame I've been conditioned to feel about being selfish. So I'm going to avoid it because, right, we say this, I would feel bad if I did that thing, even though I really want to do it. I would let people down and feel bad. Therefore, that's why I'm not doing it, right? This is why we procrastinate. We procrastinate because we have a fear of our feelings. Sometimes we call this a fear of failure or fear of rejection, but even in those cases, Failure feels bad. Rejection feels bad. So at its core, if you want like a core idea, why am I not doing things that I say I'm going to do? It's because my brain is protecting me from pain. My brain is protecting me from painful emotions. That is, in my opinion, a loving thing that our brain is doing. We can work with our brain in that understanding. We can double check if our brain is totally right and we actually don't want to do the thing. Or if my brain, in this case, is wrong and saying, hey, brain, I know you're really scared of the feelings we're going to feel, but this one's actually worth it. That's what the strategies I'm about to tell you are going to help you accomplish. But we first just have to have this core understanding that procrastination is not a personality flaw. Procrastination is not like a terrible crime. Procrastination is protective, and it's because our brain is protecting us from feelings. And so, why does our brain have a fear of feelings? This is your first podcast. I'm going to repeat it for you, but everyone else who's listened to more than one probably already knows. It's because of our social conditioning. This is where all the inhuman stories come in. The inhuman stories our society has emotionally and mentally conditioned us to believe. And I think of it as this triple layer cake of shame. So like the first layer is normal human behavior is failing. So, wanting to have a snack and like eat before you record a podcast, that's a failure because you promised you'd record the podcast at 1 p.m., right? So that's like already feeling shame. And then when we fail, that we should feel bad about ourselves. That's like the second layer. So doing something that's like totally fine and normal is a failure. Failure should make you feel bad is the second layer of the cake. And then the third layer of the cake is that feeling bad is dangerous. It's this horrible triple down. So like my podcast example. So I realized my body was fatigued and hungry and wanted to move a little differently. So instead of doing the podcast at 1 p.m., like I said I was going to, I ate something, I walked around the house, I did some other things that were more moving my body, and that felt good. I felt refreshed, and then I was ready to do the podcast. My old shame story would have been like, now you're all behind. Now this day is a mess. The schedule is a disaster. And by the way, like I did have a little bit of it as I sat down to record. Everything's a disaster. This is such a failure. Your whole day is blown. What's wrong with you? Right. So that's that first layer of shame messaging that I've internalized from others, that going off course, not showing up exactly and being perfect in the way I promised myself I would be, that's a failure. And then it's like, you should feel bad about failing. What is wrong with you? Don't you feel guilty? Don't you feel shame for messing up your day? Because you need to feel that shame in order to learn to do differently next time. Second layer of inhuman story, as we have talked about before, that is definitely not the way to learn things, is to beat yourself up and feel bad about it. And then the third layer is when you're feeling all that shame, saying, oh my gosh, I can't handle feeling all the shame. I can't handle feeling that bad. And then what we usually do when we're in that state, where we're feeling that bad, we're feeling that wrong, we usually go do something else to help ourselves feel better, which ends up honestly delaying the activity further. That is the real procrastination cycle. So if we recognize what's happening and don't do the whole triple layer dance of this means I'm a failure and failure means I have to feel bad and feeling bad is dangerous, so I better go feel better, you will literally do more of what you want to do. And you won't make it mean anything bad about yourself when you don't do something you intend to do. Say you intended to get your inbox to 0 one day. You were so committed. You're working with me. You're one of my clients right now. And we talked about that as a goal. And then something happens, or it took longer than you thought, and you're at the end of the time and your inbox is not at 0. That's the moment where we don't have to do the triple layer shame cake. Okay. Right. And then the icing on top of that cake is calling the fact that you didn't meet your goal, calling the fact that I started recording this podcast at 2 p.m. instead of 1 p.m. lazy, procrastination, I don't follow through on what I promised, like all of the names we give it. We don't have to do any of that. We never have to drive home this message that we are the problem. There's something wrong with us. None of that is useful. It's also not accurate, in my opinion. So if it's a loving, protective action that we're taking for ourselves when we delay doing something that we said we wanted to do, let's start there. So if you really were like, okay, today's the day, I really want to blah, blah, blah. First of all, like off the gate, like double check you really want to do it, right? And then if you, at the end of the day, you end up not doing, we don't have to do a whole what's wrong with me, I'm terrible, blame cycle. We can say, okay, my brain was really protecting me from something today. What was it protecting me from? And like get curious with yourself, right? And saying, especially if you look back and you say, you know what, I did really want to do this. Shoot, I didn't do it, but I wanted to do it. And I wanted to do it for me. And it didn't happen. Rats, what's going on? So maybe in this case, my brain's being overprotective. So it stopped me. I don't have to get mad at my brain. Or if I get mad at my brain, I don't have to make it mean that my brain's broken anyway. All your feelings are valid. But we can say, okay, my brain was being overprotective. It stopped me from doing it today. Well, how can we work with my brain knowing that's what happened in order to ease its protective mechanism so that I do get it done tomorrow or whenever next I'm going to do it, right? Because of course, if there are things you want to get done and it's because you're afraid of the feelings you'll have when you do them, well, you're feeling all those feelings ahead of time and you're guaranteeing you'll never get the thing done. So of course, that's like the reason why in that minority of cases where it's kind of true procrastination, where you want to do something and you're not doing it. And that's really what's going on. I do think it's kind of the minority, but it might be the majority for you. All that's happening is you're afraid of feeling your feelings. So how do we stop doing that? We face our feelings. We feel our feelings. We do things while our feelings are there anyway. You feel the feelings and do it anyway. I like to say to myself, I can feel the feeling. So especially when I first started doing a lot of this stuff, which I have determined and decided and really do believe is some of the best, most exciting work I've been doing, like the podcast and social media and coaching. Of course, I was scared at first. And there were times where I procrastinated posting something or procrastinated telling people about the podcast or whatever. So when I finally was going to hit send, I told myself, okay, I'm scared of the feelings that we'll feel when I do this, but I know how to feel a feeling. So we're going to go ahead and do it anyway, even though we're scared. Right? So I feel like I could end the podcast right there because honestly, when I'm working with my coaching clients, a lot of the things that people are saying, what's wrong with me? I keep procrastinating it and I don't know why. Usually the reason is they really don't want to be doing it. And when we look at it deeply and closely, we realize they don't have to be doing most of the things that they're saying they're procrastinating doing. And it's such a relief to just get them off their plate. There's a second category too, though, where they don't want to be doing it. It's not their favorite, but it is tied to the underlying work. And so I would say mostly for those things, that's what this next list is for. So for the rest of the podcast, what I'm going to be giving you is sort of a menu and be quick snippets of ideas. I'm not going to fully flesh them out because I've heard them from other people. They were helpful for me. But these are sort of the how to get yourself started when your brain is overprotective, but you want to get something started to get it done. Okay. So the first thing, this one's still mine, is give yourself permission to never, ever do it. I feel like sorry for frustrated about because you're like, I want to stop procrastinating. And I'm like, then don't ever do it. But like, there's something about this tug of war. If I have to do it, but I don't want to do it, but I have to do it. I don't want to do it. If you just drop the rope on have to do it and really let yourself sit with like, no, seriously, what if I never do this? No. And if you get just like fear, it's like, okay, but underneath the fear, what happens if I never do it? And just sort of waiting to see if any actual genuine desire to do it emerges at all. Right? Because like what happens if we really honor, if we don't want to do something, we let it go and don't do it. Your worth is not on the line, whether you do anything. Your survival's not on the line. If you're somehow procrastinating eating, it's good to eat once in a while. But you know what I mean? Like if it's like a task, if it's like an action, why don't I do this elaborate bookkeeping system I set up for myself? Oh, I don't want to do it. Maybe I should look into hiring a bookkeeper, right? Like sometimes it's like, oh, I need to just stop doing it and ask someone for help, or I just need to stop doing it and notice that nobody dies. I need to stop trying to answer my emails within 2 hours of receiving all of them and notice that nobody cares. Like a lot of it is that, honestly. If you do that and you're like, no, I think there is a reason here that I would want to do it, ground yourself in that reason and make sure you like the reason. And only those things get to stay on the list. So one area that I wonder if all of you are wondering about right now, but I know I get a lot, is like, okay, but what about like non-patient facing clinical work? So inboxes, results, forms. No, none of us signed up to do those things when we went to medical school, nursing school. Like when you did your clinical training, you probably weren't like, my dream job is to fill out a bunch of disability forms, right? And so this falls into this gray area where it's like, yeah, it makes sense why you don't want to do it. And it is possible. So you can still give yourself permission to never do it. But when you sort of sit with that, there is like a small reason. It's not a big driving reason, but like, right, there is actually a purpose for me to fill out the form. And it's beyond whether the patient will be mad at me. It's like, there is a service here for the patient. It's certainly not as satisfying or strong. It doesn't give me a dopamine hit the way that seeing a patient and helping them feel better directly does. But like, it is in service of my patient, which I do generally still want to be doing my job in service of my patients. So I've started to do this more actively. So I sit down to do my inbox. I have specific times I do it. So I'm not doing it all day because it will just never feel good if I'm doing it all day. But I have specific times that I do it. And I'm like, okay, every name I see is a person. I am doing this for that person. Because for me, at least, that helps me kind of activate a bit of that dopamine hit, if you know what I mean. Like that's satisfying. Like that person was worried about their blood work. Now I have a normal result. I'm going to quickly email them, say, hey, it's normal, or, whatever your process is. Done. I don't have to have drama about it. I don't have to be like, oh, this feels terrible. I don't want to do this. Like I really ground myself in my reason why I'm doing it. I set specific times to do it. And that helps me to actually motivate to do it. Right. And then pieces, especially that non-patient facing clinical work, I really then ask myself if I have to do it. So like I already gave you an example earlier of that thing I overpromised to a patient. So now actually today I messaged them and we're like, hey patient, I took a look and I couldn't find, here's a resource I did find. I know it's not quite what you're looking for, but here you go. And I'll let you know if I do find anything else. And I like got it off of my list because that's as much of the task that was going to get done. If I do find the resource they're asking for, I will forward it to them, but it's no longer like I haven't owned it as mine. I let it go. There was another task. Someone wanted me to make a list of medications that was going to involve a lot of like research and things. And I took it on. I overpromised it. Whoopsies. And so now I'm procrastinating it because I don't want to do it. I would rather do other things with my time. And so I delegated it. I have a pharmacist on my team and I just said, hey, pharmacist, could you do this? And, she might say no. And I would like honor that. And then I would just like get back to patient saying, hey, I wasn't able to get this in the time frame you asked for. You know what I mean? Like I will work through it then. But that's a good thing to really know, is like this non-patient facing clinical work stuff, which is often what we're procrastinating. I'm imagining if you're listening to this podcast, how much of it can you ground in your reason why? How much of it can you ground in like why it is important, at least globally, for the patients that you do care for from time to time, right? And then the rest, what can be delegated and what can just be a no? So freeing. So that's that first strategy, is give yourself permission to never do it and then really see what emerges as like a genuine, authentic desire of why you want to do it, but maybe just a little bit. Why you want to do it, but definitely it's not going to be the focus of your day. Why you're going to do it, but only in small bursts, right? And then that's the strategy you apply to it. Okay. And then if, as you're starting to apply to it, I wanted to give you a bunch of frameworks or names of strategies that I have found helpful to actually get started on applying it. So there's this concept called like minimum baseline. I believe I first heard it from this coach, Carl Lowenthal. So the idea of like, give yourself a bare minimum. If you just are really super procrastinating something and you literally haven't done it at all, start with one thing. So say there's a form that's been sitting on your desk for weeks and you just are like feeling so much shame about starting it. And even though you've told yourself, I can feel the emotion shame, like when you go to it, you're like barely looking at it. Well, maybe your minimum baseline is like, I will fill out one box today. It will be the patient's name, and then tomorrow I will fill out another box. And you just keep doing that until the thing is done. Minimum baseline, like the thing that is so easy and accessible, it's like boring. A non-clinical example is like say exercise. Like a lot of people are like, well, I'm going to start exercising. Well, I immediately have to research 5 gyms and find which one's best and have to go every single day. Otherwise, what's the point? Like we get so perfectionistic and like overly achieving about something that we're literally not doing at all. And so minimum baseline is a way around that where it's like, I'm not doing any of that. I am moving my body in a way I already know how to do this many times per week. Maybe it's, or in like, I'm going for a 10-minute walk around the block a day. That's it. It's boring. You're like perfectionistic overachiever, wants all the A pluses, is like embarrassed. That's a thing. That's a place to start because you'll actually start. And then you build on that. You build on that momentum. Now it's a part of your routine. It's a part of your schedule. And then you build from there. Because there's this other concept also from Carl Lowenthal about the infinite 1%. So like the 1% of the task, which is the beginning, is the magic. It is what lets the rest of it happen. So many people never even start. They plan and then don't follow through, like that sort of classic true procrastination. Another one of my teachers, Brooke Castillo, calls that failing ahead of time. Like you never even begin the whole project because you haven't started that first baby 1%. And that is where all the magic is. It's not first baby 1%, that minimum baseline. So how can you begin? Whatever the thing is that you're like, I know I want to do this. I want to get into a habit of it, but it just feels so hard. How do you make it feel easy to begin in a way that's kind of a yawn, that's kind of like embarrassingly small, but you know you can do it? Let's start doing that. A phrase or a couple of phrases that I first heard from a third coach, Jimmy Turner, who's actually also a physician, that he includes at the end of his podcast is start by starting, start before you're ready. I just really like that. So it's just, again, the same notion. You see, I'm describing it 3 different ways because I know it resonates for different people at different times. And so it's like, how do we begin this process if you feel like you're totally at a stalemate? The last bit of getting started, that is, again, from me, is getting honest about if you really are at the start line or if you've actually already begun. So like people say, I procrastinate on my inbox, but they literally do their inbox every day. They just mean they don't do it as much. It means they mean it takes it longer. The time that an item enters an inbox, it takes longer for it to exit than they wish. You're still doing it. If you're finishing your charts, but you're finishing them 2 weeks later, that means you're finishing your charts. So we're not at the starting line. We're working on, you already have a good foundation. You're beyond the infinite 1%. You're already doing the task. That's the hardest part is behind you. Now it's about just shifting and understanding what's getting in the way of you is shifting to something being more efficient, more at a flow or an energy that works for you so that you can get it done quicker and off your plate quicker. That's different than actually procrastinating. Is this resonating with you guys? Like, I just think it's so important to like really know how often we call something procrastinating that's not. But then I do also want to give you these tools for something that's like, no, I truly like, I've been waiting to hit go on this project in my life. I've been meaning to do this for years and I never have. And I really want to do it for myself. That's what these strategies are for. Okay. And then 2 more buckets of strategies. So say all of that sounds fine, but when you go to get started, you just are hit with like how many feelings you're having. You finally are asking for that promotion. You finally are doing that thing for yourself and you feel like you're going to die. You feel terrible about it. You finally are trying to finish charting after each patient. And it just feels horrendous to see all the typos and all of the jumble. Like you can't because it's like physically too painful. That thing your brain has been protecting you for, you finally are opening yourself up to it and your brain's like, right? So one way to kind of get around this and to work with what your brain is doing, knowing procrastination is protective, right? You make the bad feelings the goal. So I'm going to, again, list a bunch of different ways I've heard this described, and I find this so helpful. So one is you make it like a challenge. And so one teacher described it like a B-, like you make You aim for B minus in all of your charting. You aim for B minus forms because that means they're completed and they're fine, right? Or beyond that, like something that I have been doing a lot, it's to do with my social media posting, but I think you could do it for anything, is a coach I have for marketing talks about like a garbage post challenge. The idea is like you have to put something out on social media every day, but it has to take you under 10 minutes. It just has to have words on it. And so if you have those elements, that's your win. It's supposed to look like garbage. It's supposed to sound like garbage. So say you're like, you want to start more teaching or public speaking, but you're afraid your voice is going to wobble. Maybe then that's the goal, is that you go for things and you want your voice to wobble. You see how you're like leaning into the thing that your brain is saying it's too scary. A lot of this is it's a common way or strategy that people use if they're afraid of disappointing people, afraid of getting no's, afraid of getting fails, like afraid of looking stupid. So like whatever it is that your brain's afraid of doing, what if that then became your challenge? Like, okay, I'm going to have 10 people, I'm going to ask enough people to do this thing that I really want someone to do for me so that I get 10 no's. Because somewhere along the way, you might get a few yeses, and you'll definitely get over your fear of hearing no. Like in medicine, we're all very afraid, or many of us are very afraid of disappointing anybody, disappointing a patient, making a patient mad at us. So like, what if the goal was to disappoint 10 people this week? And that seems weird. You're like, what, you want me to disappoint people on purpose? Obviously, underneath, you're only going to disappoint people that you were going to disappoint anyway. So this is like to just speak to that people pleaser part of you who's like, well, I can't say no to that. Like your goal is to say no and have them be disappointed. That means you've got to win, because you notice that even though they're disappointed, you haven't died, they haven't died, everyone's actually fine. They just have different feelings in the room, right? So something to consider. What are my other strategies? I just want to make sure I've got them all in. Okay, so then the last set of strategies is, again, things you can say to yourself before, during, and after you're trying to get that activation energy to finally do the thing you want to do. Or you thought you were going to do something and then you ended up not doing it, and then your brain is about to beat yourself up because you didn't get it done the way you hoped you would. These are things you can repeat to yourself. I make sense, right? I make sense. Everything here belongs. My brain was protecting me. Another one is, anything you do today is good enough because you are not defined by what you do. That's just an important one. So if you're really beating yourself up for things you do or don't do in a day, especially don't do, you're a human being, not a human doing. So no matter what you did or didn't get done today, you are enough, right? So that's my list. If it was slightly overwhelming, I understand. Some of those concepts, like some of those coaches actually have a whole episode about. I like giving people a menu and having you choose off of them. If there's one there that was a bit confusing to you, you can always reach out and I'd love to explain it to you more. But the final thing I want to say is, actually one more strategy, and then the final thing I want to say. So one more strategy you could use is accountability from someone else. So whether it's a peer or you hire a coach like myself, so that you get into the habit of reflecting. I wanted to get this much done and I didn't get that much done. What really happened there? How can we get some strategies so that you get more of what you want to get done and let the rest of it go? That's like some of the core work I do with most of my clients, really. So we know that we are social creatures. And I've heard from several of my clients, like, yeah, I wasn't sure about, restricting my inbox time to this time, or I wasn't sure about finally saying no to patients, but I knew you were going to ask me about it. So I went ahead and did it. Love that. So whatever activation energy works for you, using other people's sort of accountability cheerleaders is another great strategy to use. So in line with that, I have a question for you now at the end of this podcast. It's been all about how procrastination in a non-shame-based way is really just protective. Is there something that you have been delaying? Is there something that you've been really wanting to do for you that your brain has been overprotective and stopping you from doing, especially around the work that this podcast is about, which is making your experience of healthcare more human. Is there an idea that you've heard from a podcast or a webinar or anything, some content that I've had where you're like, oh, it would be so nice to do this thing, but I haven't done it yet? And you're maybe feeling a bit bad about yourself. You're feeling like maybe I should do it, but I can't do it, but da 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 da. So if that thing, there is something, at the beginning, I'm recording this at the beginning of 2023, there's something you really want to be incorporated into your experience of healthcare so it will feel better to you. And you heard those strategies I just gave of how to get started, but you want a little extra support, I would want you to email me at hello@joanchanmd.com or send me a message on social media at joanchanmd on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. Those are the places I'm on. I will coach you for free, writing back and forth about that thing. That is how much I'm hoping that people listen to this podcast, not only to learn theoretically, but to understand how to apply it to your work in healthcare. I want to honor your protective brain. So I'm not going to make you feel bad of like, why don't you just do the thing anyway, right? That's my whole deal is your brain has been protecting you and you really want to get this done. Let's talk about why that is. Let's talk about a strategy that would work for you. Will it work for you to start by starting to schedule yourself a minimum baseline where you just do one little teeny bit of it per day? Will it work for you to really make yourself a challenge to feel worse in order to get what you want? Like, what's going to be a strategy that works for you? So please email me, hello@joanchanmd.com, or message me at joanchanmd on social media. I want to hear what you would love to incorporate into your practice, but you're struggling to do because your brain is overprotective. So with that, that's the end of the podcast today. I hope everyone has an amazing day, and I'll talk to you all next week.